Good evening and welcome to Lots Drawn. This is a podcast where, of course, we discuss things around the tourism, around the culture, around environment, and several of the other areas of development in Tobago. Today, I'm really pleased to have with me Dr. Ryan Allard with me, my friend and colleague. And Ryan, I know that a number of persons may not know exactly who you are, but I think it's good if you kind of set the tempo before we get into talking about environment, Tobago, tourism, and so on. Tell everybody, who is Ryan Allard? Where have you studied? What have you done? Yeah, it's good to hear it coming from the horse's mouth.
Right. It's always weird for me to answer that question because I never know how far back to go, and how much to skip along the way when I come forward. But
I give you permission. You skip.
So, maybe we'll start all the way back from maybe even my primary school days, because I think people can at least reference those institutions, primary school, high school. So primary school, I was born, grew up in Canaan, went to Signal Hill Primary School. Right. A long time ago. I hear the school is doing very well now, so I'm very happy about that.
That's part of my history too.
Absolutely.
I made a piece of history with that school, but we'll talk about that.
We'll get there. We have to get there. All right. So Signal Hill, then went on to Bishop's High School, did, all the way up to A-levels there, good 7 years.
Right.
After that, I went off to the U.S. to study. Well, I was always obsessed with planes and flying, so I did aerospace engineering,
Okay.
Went to the U.S. to MIT for that. And after that, what did I do with my life?
So you went to MIT up to what level? PhD
up
or
to
the master's?
Up to the bachelor's. Did my
bachelor's
degree.
Okay,
my bachelor's of engineering there. So that was a while ago. After that, I worked in a couple different industries, exploring, what is out there, So I worked in finance in the US. I worked at PwC in Trinidad, actually, in the business consulting, the advisory business. Right. So there's where you get to explore a bit of several industries and explore your ability to interact and to understand and enjoy them. And I discovered that the transportation is a very interesting field. There's so much going on in that field. And I ended up, returning to school after working for some years to study a master's and then a PhD in transportation systems. Oh,
so that's your specialty. Just share with me because, I'm now in that same vein. But what was your area, your thesis? What was your thesis?
Right. So for the master's side, I was studying the ability to use technologies to improve to make it safer for people driving. Technologies in cars themselves.
Right. Gotcha.
Right. So they call them advanced driver assistance technologies.
Okay.
Right. So it's what you might think of as the lane change assist technology, or nowadays we call it all autonomous cars, right? But it's made up of several different things, right? So lane change assist is one. Automatic emergency braking is another one. Ensuring that there's a safe distance between your car and the car in front.
Okay.
Right. So all those kinds of technologies together. There's even things nowadays where they can tell if a driver is falling asleep.
Yes.
And the car can slow down to protect you. Right.
Yes.
So all those kinds of things. I was studying how those would impact the safety of drivers. Right. So I did some simulation on that and did some analysis. So that was the master's.
Right.
Then I said, let me continue this because it's interesting. There's a lot more to be done out there. So I ended up doing the PhD. And that was all in Europe. I was in Portugal, in Lisbon. And the PhD was in a very different field. That was more in how you connect different types of transportation systems so that they work better.
So are you trilingual?
I've learned a bit of Spanish, a bit of French before I went away, and then I learned quite a bit of Portuguese while I was living.
While you were there,
because I was there for a good 4 years or so.
Well, boy, I gotta bring some of my Brazilian music to talk to you.
Absolutely, I love it. You explore so many different musical styles, especially when you go away, because it's more natural to explore when you're away. But I've explored them. I love so many different styles. You know, I love.
Boy, I tell you, we
hear
may
new
have
things.
to make a program where we talk about that transportation thing, because that's amazing. That whole thing you described is pretty amazing. But let's focus on the environment. I know you've been doing a lot of work with the NGO,
Right.
Environment Tobago. But tell us, I mean, in a nutshell, what your work with the environment in context of Tobago, what does it entail, or what did it entail? Tell us some of the wins you've had, you know,
Right.
in some of the work that you've done.
Right. So maybe it's better to continue from the degree, because the degree it gave me a background in transportation systems, right?
Right.
But then after that, I ended up working with a non-profit focused on climate change.
Right. So
that is the connection.
Right.
That
So
gets me
now
back to
I am
Environment Tobago.
so glad you said climate change, because I have to put a picture to you. You know, recently at the COP26,
Right.
you saw the minister from Tuvalu, right? He went into the water to make the point that the islands, you know, in the Pacific where he was, these islands were being taken over by water.
Yep.
And that they were making the case that they may even lose the island itself, or the islands, and that they want to have sovereignty by having the state still be maintained and recognized. And then they spoke about some of the other things that will happen. For example, some of the embodied knowledge, some of the practices, they will lose some of that stuff. And then we looked at the area of the Himalayas, right? Where the glaciers are no longer happening and there's not enough water and they have to divert to get water and so on. So clearly a lot of people who are taking this climate thing jokingly, clearly there has to be this nexus between the environment and also the climate change. So kind of give me a little bit of your tidbit there, because I'm glad you said it, because for me, that was so interesting that this area of climate change and also looking at the environment, how important it is. I know, for example, we have lost that whole road where we had Robinson Crusoe Hotel, right? Where Scarborough Set, all of that's been lost and so on. So I know we also deal with coastal erosion. But you go ahead. You take the floor from here.
There's so many directions you can go with that, right? So climate change it's a big, messy, hairy problem, right? It affects the entire globe, everybody, in different ways, right? And it's an environmental problem, it's a social problem,
cultural.
It's an economic. Yeah. It's an economic problem. It's an engineering problem. Yeah. It's a political problem. Certainly cultural, as you said.
Yep.
So many elements to it, right? So everybody has a different perspective, and people's perspective tend to depend on what their individual experience with climate change has been. Right. So if they have not seen something that affects them that they can link mentally with climate change, they may say, "Oh no, climate change is not a real thing. That's some made-up hoax." You know, Chinese hoax is what was a big thing for a while, right?
Yeah.
So it's not real, you know. But if you live in a place where you have more fires, you have more storms, you have increased flooding, you have drought, or you have excess rain, or you have a range of other things. You know, for instance, things that are harder to see, such as the migration of certain species.
Right, yes.
Right? So they're moving because it's warmer for them in some
right.
areas, which is bad for some of them. It's better for some of them. So they'll go either towards the warmth or away from the warmth. So it ends up being a very sticky problem. It's hard to communicate to everybody. I think the global climate change movement, they had to change their language in order to get people more interested in it, to understand that this is a serious threat to humanity.
Yeah.
Because in the past, remember those images of polar bears and little ice floating, icicles, bits of ice, and polar bears dying and it's about to lose all its land. That would engage certain types of people. A small subset of the typical population. Maybe 1-2%. They say because they'll be emotionally attached to a polar bear that's about to lose its land, lose its way of life. But then, if you want to get a mass movement where you get governments to change laws, you get people to change their behavior, you need to do a lot more than that. You need to get the people's emotion about their daily life.
Did you see that clip with the cartoon, well, an animated feature with the dinosaur going into the United Nations to address you? So
yes.
I love that.
Extinction something, yes.
Yeah, but you know, the line that stuck with me is extinction is a bad idea. Extinction is a bad idea. You know, you guys, you all need to pay attention to this. So, I mean, let's bring it back a bit, Ryan, to Tobago. I know we had the issue of talking about drainage, mangroves. Tell us some of those general things that we're doing in Tobago where environment is concerned.
Right. So, I mean, Tobago is a very small island, right? So we can't get away from the water. We can't get away from, you know, coastline and what's happening to the coastline, right? So when you look at the trend of Tobago's climate over the last, let's say, 30 years, you know, within somebody's lifetime, you can see changes, right? You can see coastlines that are degrading. You can see roads that are, you know, on the way here, you know, in Mount Irving, the road actually is falling away.
Yes.
Right? So you need to take action to fix that. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because, you know, there's erosion, maybe because of poor coastal development, right? But there's erosion, the climate is making the waves, you know, the sea levels are higher. So when the waves come, that's higher. If there's a storm, if there are stormy seas, those seas are higher than they would have been in stormy seas 30 years ago, right? So it ends up making more of that wave action that takes away the soil that would be supporting the road. That's one example, right? You can go around Tobago and you see several examples of that. So that's one. You look at, for instance, what's happening in rainfall. You know, we need water to drink. We need to have our dams filled, ideally to capacity as often as possible. And we used to have a clear rainy season and a clear dry season, right? Yes. That to me, I don't know how we could predict that anymore.
We don't even know what is Piti Karim.
right. So it ends up being a very difficult thing to pinpoint that, okay, this is happening, this has happened, you know, especially when you have younger person who have not experienced the past situation, right? Yeah. So you end up having a lot of changes happening very slowly. And what we need to be doing in Tobago is being very clear about communicating that these changes are linked to climate change, one. That two, we need to do something about them. I mean, what we need to do has to be something that's sustainable, meaning that it doesn't, you know, it's not something we can put in place now and in 5 years we have to go and spend more money to fix it again because we didn't do it correctly, all right? So it's a thing where, you know, reinforcement of the coastline, how we build on the coastline, how we reinforce roads, how we protect floods. You know, Chicago flooded, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Right. So how do we protect against that happening in the future without having to build enormous walls, for instance?
But as you're there, Ryan, I think it's important as we are on, we have to talk about the irresponsible nature of some of our citizens.
Right.
People are still throwing fridges in rivers. People are still throwing old beds in rivers. People are still throwing dead animals in rivers. Yes. I mean, I think it would be good to get some commentary on that.
Well, it really should not be done. It's clear. I mean, the thing is, people feel that I think people are disconnected, one from the environment and two from each other. Right? We don't realize that we're all in this together. We're all connected, and
That's a good point.
We're all affecting the quality of life of everybody else.
Of everybody. Yeah.
Right? So when we go and we dump in could be a mangrove, could be a river, could be on the coastline near a beach. You know, sometimes when you go down to, for instance, Kilwin Bay, you see, you know, dumped, you know, as you said, you know, old furniture, whatever it is. I was in the mangrove today and I saw a lot of garbage there, you know, and it damages the mangrove. The mangrove, as an example, if it ends up dying because of the damage we're causing, as well as climate change, that also affects it, right? But if it ends up dying, then all the benefits that we got from the mangrove would be gone.
I have to tell you this story, just because it's juicy. So I paid a guy to go to the labas, right, to dump some garbage, right? These old documents, all kinds of stuff. And then the following day, I got a call from the police. The police told me that I dumped some garbage on that Orange Hill Road. I said, no, that's impossible. I never did such a thing. I will never do that.
Right.
They said, but there are documents with your name on it. So we could only trace it back to you.
Right.
I had to now give them the number of the driver that I used. He, instead of going there, just found another place where he thought he can just dump it.
Right.
Right? So again, your point has to be taken. I mean, this is a simple story I'm telling you, but it also shows about how irresponsible people can be.
Absolutely,
you know?
absolutely. And it's as simple as, and you see this several times a month, let's say. Somebody is driving in a car, they have their drink in their hand or their wrapper, the hand casually goes out the window and magically it has nothing else in it. The hand is empty. And this is a constant thing. People don't realize that these things have consequences for our own environment, economy, way of life, quality of life, all these things, you know. And parents are teaching this to their children.
Correct. So just moving from one to the next. Give me some commentary on the mangrove. What's the situation as far as you know in terms of how we are managing that?
Right. So mangroves are water systems, right? So these are trees, of course, that grow in the marsh, grow in the water, on the coastline. And they have this lovely design, you know, when you go to them and you feel almost like a spiritual connection, you know, because it's so wonderful to be there, be in the middle of it. But the thing is that they are sensitive, right? They have functions to slow the wave action of water, excessive water that could cause flooding, right? So they help to reduce flooding. They have functions of creating nurseries for crab, nurseries for fish, right? So that allows the biodiversity of Tobago to live on, to continue, right? And of course, all of that feeds into all the fishes that we actually catch, right? So no, we don't catch the fishes that are in the nursery, clearly, right? But that's it's a connected system, right? So it's like if you cut off one part of your body, you're going to be very sad, right? The rest of your body might be there, but then it's a connected system you've damaged, right? So it's the same thing, you know, you have to protect the mangrove. So what's happening now is that it's being affected by, of course, like we said, dumping. Big problem, right? But even besides that, climate change is causing some big issues on the mangrove, right? So if you go there now, you're smelling the sulfur, the hydrogen sulfide, you know, basically that's the rotten egg smell that you get from it. Partly because of the sargassum seaweed that's, you know, making it difficult for the mangrove to live, basically. So that's a bit more distant from our immediate actions in Tobago,
right?
But it's a big problem that we do need to address, right, before it becomes a critical problem. Right?
We went to Little Tobago recently, and that was one of the first observations we made about the garbage. There has to be a proper garbage collection method there.
Right.
Again, you know, people left garbage different places. I thought that was unfortunate. And you see it all over the place. I mean, that even though I remember some years ago, while I was at tourism, there was even an attempt to do something similar to what Canada was doing, where you had recyclable, you had, you know, dump, and then you had compost,
right? You
know, so that people will know, throw the banana here, put the paper here, you know, and put the can here. You know what I mean? I think that experiment didn't last very long. Because, you know, something like that, I mean, I don't want to go back to when we had the thing where Pat Bishop did the thing with Charlie. You know, that was years ago with the garbage and all that. But I don't know what we can do, because there's something you said today that for me is poignant. The one that you said, they have to understand that it's not just you that I'm affecting, but I'm also affecting me and everybody else who's in this space.
Absolutely, yeah. So the thing about sorting garbage and waste and recycling and all of that is that it takes immense cultural change.
Yes.
Not easy. Nowhere in the world is it easy, right? So the countries that we look to that are examples now were not examples 50 years ago.
Right.
But the thing is, they didn't do the change in 1 or 2 years. It was a holistic approach. They said, you know what? We want to fix our waste problem. We don't want to have excess waste. We don't want to have people dumping disposable garbage when it could be composted. We don't want to be dumping recyclable waste. We don't want to be confusing all those things, right? We don't want to be dumping sometimes toxic waste into a dump that is not suitable for that. Because of course there's leakage and that causes poisoning of fishes and food and all kinds of things. So there was set in place a multi-pronged approach where you need to have a vision for it. It can't just be we do a one-off project and then we good. We're good for 5 years, or we say, we've done this and, you're making a big announcement. You have to think, okay, well, this is a complex situation that we need a complex answer for, right? You have to deal with the people and the social, maybe resistance to this movement. You have to educate people about the importance of this. You might need to get some technology. You certainly need to get the expertise. If you don't have the expertise already, let's hire the right experts. We can't just do it, and say that we know what we're doing, right? So there are all these elements. There's the policy change. There's the operations. If we have dustbins in a community, 3 different types, collecting 3 different types of waste, we have to have a system for collecting it and for disposing or composting or dealing with whatever's put into those bins, right? So you can't just say the bins are there, go and use them.
Yeah.
People will
that's a cultural shift.
People will not want to do it, right? Or they would maybe make some mistakes, mix things in, because they don't think nobody uses those bins anyway, right? That's one side. And on the back side now, you have these systems were not built to fix those, right? So all we have now are garbage men that go and take every bin and put it into the same place. You need to have that system be changed in order to deal with a proper recycling.
I'm glad you made that point, Ryan. I'm glad you made that point. Some years, that's such a really solid point. Some years ago, we had an investor that made a proposal to have land next to the dump. And what he had proposed, actually the guy had all he lined up all his ducks. He knew how much medical waste we had in Tobago. He knew how much waste was coming from the hotels. He knew how much waste was coming from businesses. He also knew how much waste was coming generally from the public. He had this thing down. I saw it with tonnage in terms of weight, how much they literally have. And what he wanted to do was, he had this idea about going zero waste, which is, of course, is a nice dream.
Right.
The world looking at that too, but the idea was really to take the waste and convert it into, on one hand, chemicals, and I think on the other hand, if it's not bricks, it is some other product. But I think it was mainly chemicals. There were chemicals that the idea was to move it and convert it into chemicals. It never got off the ground. But I thought that was a very interesting proposal that I saw that came here. I don't know if you've ever heard about anything like that. I also knew of another guy that came with a proposal from Africa to convert newspaper into bricks. And I actually saw him do it with other chemicals like kerosene and other stuff. So I don't know if those things are feasible in terms of looking at how we can convert waste to move to this zero waste position. Let me hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so there are several different approaches, several different technologies, processes around the world, right? For taking something that somebody considers waste and converting it into something with economic value, right? The challenge with many of them is the cost. Right? Because it's often cheaper and simpler to get new stuff than to take existing stuff and convert it into, to manage waste holistically, right? Or to convert it into something of economic value. So the challenge is always figuring out a way to get over that initial hurdle of making it cost effective and making it valuable for somebody to sell it afterwards. Otherwise, the continuity and sustainability of a business or of an operation is going to be challenged, right? So there's that one big issue. There's another issue of the fact that Tobago's supply of waste is going to be very limited because it's a small population, right? So if you install a large, let's say the smallest possible facility you can to have an economically viable operation, it still could be, depending on what it is, it still could be too large for Tobago's waste supply alone.
But this guy I'm telling you about, he did all that homework.
Right.
And he found it was feasible.
Right.
But it wasn't entertained at that time. I'm just saying, but exactly what you just said, he did all his homework before he can decide if it's viable.
Right. Well, that's good.
I actually think he took it to another island.
Well, if he's a businessman and entrepreneur,
Well, he
go
does
where
it
he
all
can.
over. He says he does it all over Asia.
Okay.
And so on. You know, it's nothing new here.
Right.
I want to just segue to tourism for many reasons, Ryan. We used to have the tagline, clean, green, serene. And then we moved that to live the culture. And then we now move it to beyond ordinary, right? So those have been three big manifestations over the last, I would say 20 years. Well, 23 right back to now. Europe loves the idea of clean, green, serene. And of course, we used to say safe. Right. Now I think people tend to hold back a bit on the safe. But as a tagline, and also the fact that we really, people who come here tend to say Tobago is very cleaner when they drive around. I boast because I say, well, my garbage truck comes almost every day. Right. So I boast about that when I'm talking to my friends. And I think a lot of people enjoy that too. But what's the take in terms of community tourism, the environment, the things that you all are doing? I know the last few years we did how many conferences we did? 2?
Which conferences? And
the one with environment, where we had all the stakeholders.
Oh, no, that was 2019.
That was 2019.
Tobago Environmental Partnership Conference.
Correct,
yes.
the partnership. That
we
one.
had the president there of the nation,
Right.
president there. We had a lot of stakeholders,
That's
Trinidad
right.
and Tobago, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think here's a good way to make sure that we say this. In Tobago, what stunned me at that time was that we had more than 20 stakeholders who are involved in environmental activities. Isn't that so?
In Tobago alone, I've never done a count, but it could be.
I remember that sheet that, during that time when we were doing,
I know
that blew my mind.
We had 100 and something stakeholders attend, but many of them were from Trinidad too.
Okay.
So from Tobago alone, I could see us having 20. I could see so, because we have
I think it was a few.
We have some different divisions of THA, very different
Correct.
divisions. We have some individual companies, consultants too. We certainly have, because there's so many aspects to it. You have people who do tours, for instance. You have people who are in the hotel industry. You have people who are doing the water sports.
Yeah.
You have people who are managing, maybe small guest houses like an eco lodge. You have all the villas. They're all part of this, and they're tourism and environment. You have the institutes that do research. You have the IMA. Right. You have all the.
You have Eric.
You have Eric. You have all the aspects of the different parts of the THA, as well as its well, not necessarily THA's state agencies, but the other state agencies. They have all interests in ensuring that the environment is sustainably managed, right? So they will be part of it. So we could easily get more than 20. And of course, Environment Tobago is a key part of that too, to bringing everything together, right? So
tell me a bit about the support in terms of, is there a lot of external support for what we're doing for the environment in Tobago? Is there a lot of funding from outside, a lot of partnership, collaboration, or what is that like?
Right. So I think there is, but it isn't enough, right? Because
enough.
Because we do get some funding from, for instance, the Green Fund locally, which is a national fund created, that Green Fund levy that all businesses pay. I think it's 0.6% of all the profits. So that goes towards this large fund that is used for environmental mediation and reforestation, etc. Right? So that's there, and that's a national fund. Separately, you have the Green Climate Fund, which is an international fund, and that's used to help climate activities around the world. Right? These funds are not always easy to get access to, because of course the entire world is competing for them. Right? Then you have various companies. You have sometimes oil companies here, other large companies locally and away that are doing their corporate social responsibility, right? So they would support a non-profit to do some of the remedial work or the education work within the environment, for instance. So we have done that. We have been supported by the various stakeholders around in the last few years, definitely.
Yeah, I know we're winding down, but tell me, do we have a firm risk mitigation process in place? Is there protocol to follow if, let us say, a ship was to, for some reason have a spill or something like that, is there a plan that exists in Tobago that, this can be initiated, boom, like that?
So there's several types of risks, and each risk will have a different approach and a different agency that's involved in managing it, right? So generally, for what you mentioned, for instance, the EMA, Environmental Management Agency, right? That's a national agency. So they will be the responsible ones to say, okay, let's enact our codes, to deal with that. But if it's something like sargassum, that's a different
That's
kind
a
of
different
thing,
one, okay.
Right? Sargassum, it's a relatively new risk, right? Since about 2013 is when the first wave came, took over many islands of the Caribbean. Became a big issue. And since then, the THA has created a sargassum response plan. Right? Now, I'm not sure if it's approved. I know there's a draft plan, and I think it's the Division of Infrastructure and Environment is involved in that. So the plan exists. It's supposed to include the TEMA and some other agencies, within Tobago and nationally, and put some things in place to, remove the sargassum, to treat with it, to maybe process it to some level so it's used for maybe agriculture and provide it for farmers, etc. Right? So that exists, and that is enacted here in Tobago. I'm not sure if there's a plan in Trinidad. I think by now there might have been some activities to develop one. So each type of risk has a different agency, a different response, a different plan.
No, that's great.
And
great
TEMA,
info. Yeah.
of course, TEMA, Tobago Emergency Management Agency, right? So the TEMA is involved in almost all of these plans, because we're talking about emergencies of various types, right? And of course, TEMA, as far as I understand it, needs some more resources to make sure that these plans are updated, because risks are changing all the time, and of course that they have the resources to enact these plans. Yeah. But that's always a risk too.
Yeah. All right. So Ryan, I mean, we've covered so many items here, and our podcast, we tend to keep it nice, short, and sweet, and juicy. But tell me, how do we see the future post-COVID? How do we handle this?
You're asking me to predict the future.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you.
They pay big agencies billions of dollars to predict the future, and they're wrong, So I can't predict the future in any kind of
I mean,
confidence.
no. I didn't mean in that sense. I mean, how do we see us moving forward? COVID is I think it's going to be something we live with for a while.
Right.
But in terms of your own sense of how we come out of this on the tourism side, and I guess it doesn't stop the environment work. That does not stop. But what are your thoughts about in terms of tourism? How you may have some lovely ideas about how we can come out of this.
Right. Okay, so let's make sure everybody listening remembers the situation that we're in, the dire situation that we're in, right? So tourism experienced a significant decline before COVID, right? TTAL came along, TTAL started to put some things in place, and things apparently were starting to turn around, and then COVID said, stop.
Yep.
Right? So that's where we are, right? And of course, TTAL has a recovery plan in place. You and I were in this recovery committee also.
That's right.
We don't know where that is at this point, right? But the document exists. There's a national recovery plan. So there are things on paper that we can use, but we need to implement. On paper is useless, right? So I think what we can do, first of all, is start to focus on implementing things, implementing policies.
And me and you, we have that.
Yeah, we could talk about that for the next 2 hours, right?
We agree on that, because, I tell you, I have this thought from Dr. Keatner's, that I share with you all the time. Implementation Deficit Disorder, IDD, right? And I tell you that, it is one of those things that I think we have that issue in the Caribbean. But people don't like to say these things openly. But I think they need to be said. That we have to find ways of implementing a lot of things we put on paper, and we spend a lot of money to get these policies and plans done, but they are not executed. They're not implemented.
I think two things come to mind about that. I mean, there's a lot of analysis done on this. I've seen some papers that analyze, as you said, the entire Caribbean's implementation history and capability.
Yes.
And found some gaps, right? But besides that, I think there are two things that make it hard for us to implement. Obviously, the leaders need to be on board, right? And I think
champions.
They need to be champions. They need to be driving things. I've heard a politician here in Tobago say that it doesn't happen unless I drive it, right? I get that, but no matter what, we have limited resources.
Yes.
So if we decide we're going to do something, we have no choice but to not do some other things.
Right. Opportunity cost.
Right. But I think they have a fear of doing that. They have a fear of saying no to the other things. We can't do everything.
Okay.
Right? So if we say, for instance, in tourism, if we say we are going to become an ecotourism heaven, then we cannot become a mass tourism heaven.
That's right.
Right? Those are total opposites, right? So we have to say, okay, we're going to do this, and what that means is we cannot do this because this is not in line with this vision. This is our vision. We're going to do this only, right? Make sure you get people involved clearly, right? They can't just do it. Leaders can't do it alone, right? That's another big issue.
No, I you know me and you, we agree on that. Come on, Ryan.
For some reason, they're convinced that they have to be the savior of your island, your nation, your whatever it is, and
it's
nobody
got to be
else.
together.
You have to do it together, right? And you see these gaps all the time. So the two things are really that you need to be able to say no to some things that are not in that vision, even if it's lovely proposals from maybe not solicited, but they're great proposals. If it doesn't align with the vision, then I think they need to be able to say no, assuming that the vision is well developed and they're committed to it. So the next big thing I think is we need to have discipline, right? So if we have a plan.
That's a big word.
That's a big word.
That's a big word.
Right. So if we say we're going to do something, we can't change our mind in a year. We can't change our mind in 2 years because these are drastic changes for Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago, right? So when you read in, I think it's The Guardian, talked about the next chief secretary will have this dramatic economic issue to deal with. I agree, right? And they said things like they're going to have to find ways to build a new economy in Tobago, right? And this means consistent effort for several years. So if, let's say, whatever party wins, whoever wins, they have a direction. They have to stick with it for as long as possible. And as long as possible means even if it's from the, even if you change a party.
Even you change again.
If you change
we've
party,
got to keep the path. Yes.
Right?
No, I'm with you.
Absolutely.
Totally with you.
And I'm not sure why it is that, the only way that these things happen is if people in Tobago tell the leaders that, no, you have to do it this way.
But I also think that the basic principle of understanding sustainable development is not about me and you now. It's always about the next generation, So you're setting up the thing in such a way that it's going to benefit future generations rather than the temporality of just, I want to get now, I want to eat a food now. You know what I mean? And I think you really hit the point there that we've got to know the opportunity because there's some things we have to do. And if we say that's what the policy says we're going to do, let's head for it.
Absolutely.
My friends can tell you, I talk about this start and stop. So many projects, the archaeotourism project on the Rockley Bay, that hurt my heart some years ago. We could have been way ahead with archaeotourism at this point.
Right.
And even in talking to Newton, from one of the big birders who goes out and does several lectures and so on. He was talking about Little Tobago. There's some quick fixes that can happen there to just change the whole story about Little Tobago. Even the idea he talked yesterday about how we can get back the bird of paradise. It just calls for political will.
Right.
To make those moves.
And I've heard that THA has something like 600 projects on its books. Hundreds of projects. Some are funded, some are not funded, some are partly funded. And I always wonder about that, right? Because if you have, as we said, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources to do everything. So if you have to prioritize among these projects, you need to find the projects that unlock ability and capabilities of Tobago in other areas, right? So for instance, if that means, if we're talking about, let's say, economic development in Tobago, right? Clearly that means we have to have more private businesses, less people working in THA, etc., right? So how do you unlock that with maybe one larger project that allows a lot of other things to happen? Clearly it has to be something that is involving training. People need to get new skills, right? And there are a lot of new things happening internationally we could learn from, right? Technological skills, for instance, business skills, right? But it's not just that. You need to also have opportunities that attract people away from the THA, right? Because they can't fire people, right? We want to make
No,
sure
yeah,
that
that's a no-no. That's a no-no.
Right. So what you want to do is you want to make sure people are ready to take opportunity and that the opportunities exist.
Yeah.
But you can't baby them for too long, right? You can't be paying for their businesses, then they will not have a big business. Because you want to create business people that know how to create opportunity, find the resources, and build bigger businesses.
Yeah, I'm glad you're saying all these things, Ryan, because the other thing that, I mean, as we really have to wind up, is this idea of some taps off and some taps on. So you have a lot of human resource, but in Tobago with 55,000 persons, there's no way we can function with a model of one is in, so the next one we have to turn off those taps. And we wait until another time so we can turn off those and then turn on those. You know, we keep doing that kind of thing where you turn on the yellow and you turn off the red, or you turn on the red and you turn off the yellow. I think we have to appreciate the fact that competencies in Tobago, every single man jack has to be part of the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the only way we could really move the island forward in the way that it's supposed to move.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, you realize that we can't talk for a short time, right?
I was going to add another comment there, but
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that,
finish it.
I was going to say that, we have underused resources in Tobago.
Correct.
Right? People and money, I would say, but the money, we have some issues with the audits, we see that, right? But the people, we have people that just go to work because they have to go to work, right? They're not actually working at their full capacity. They're not doing something they enjoy. They're just going to work to pay the job, pay the bills.
But
right?
Absenteeism and presenteeism.
Big problems, right? And then part of that is management. Part of that is having the rules with, HR rules and people management rules within the system. Part of that is we need to make sure that people have opportunity to do the things that they want to do that contribute to Tobago.
Yeah.
There's a lot we could talk about.
Right, yeah. I know we have to do, Josh, we'll definitely have to bring in Ryan again. I really want to talk about that transportation thing. It's so curious. But folks, thank you very much, Dr. Ryan Allard, better known as Ryan, for being here on Lots Drawn today. We try to cover some things on environment, waste management, some of those issues that relate to Tobago, and conceptually, from a touristic perspective, how we would love to see the development here on the island. So thanks again, Dr. Ryan, and thanks to the team behind the scenes, Josh and Polo, and Polo, the main man. But let me say thanks to that, and see you next week on Lots Drawn. All right? I'm JQ.